Good evening, team, and welcome to the January 27th edition of the Planning Commissioner. I will be your chair, Steph Routh, and with us today in person, Commissioner Ames, Commissioner Brannan, Vice Chair Pollock, myself, Vice Chair Spivak, Commissioner Knowles, Commissioner Alvarado, and online, Commissioner Thompson and Commissioner O'Mara will be here momentarily, we are sure, but we do have quorum. So today is our second work session for the CEI, the Critical Energy Infrastructure Hub Policy Project. I would love to ask if there are any items of interest from commissioners. I have one in that today at noon at the Homelessness and Housing Committee, City Council Committee, they heard the Affordable Housing Opportunities Project, which we deliberated on back in August or September, so I could barely remember it, so I want to appreciate staff for reminding me and helping with the transmittal letter. So we just introduced ourselves, and it was carried, as I didn't stay for the entire time, but Director Diefendorfer has shared that that it passed 4 out of 4 and will now go to full council. That's what I've got. And with that, speaking of Director Diefendorfer, please, the director's report, and I hope I didn't steal any of your thunder.
Thank you, Steph. Patricia Diefendorfer for the record. Chief Planner, Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. You stole just a little bit of thunder, but in a good way. No problem. No, that's good. No, perfect. I did want to just update the commission that the Affordable Housing Opportunities Project was, as Steph said, at the Homelessness and Housing Committee today, and Chair Routh did provide the commission's recommendation and kind of discuss some of the things that were in the transmittal letter, and happy to report that they ultimately did approve on with a 4-0 vote to recommend that they move to the full council with a recommendation of approval. And so it is currently scheduled for full council on February 11th. So we'll keep you posted on that, but that was great. And yes, the commission took its action on that project in August. So we're happy that we were able to get it to the council committee. The only other item I have to provide an update on is some time ago, I guess at the December 16th meeting in my director's report, I did mention that that City Council had adopted a resolution to ask staff to kind of take a look at the design review process and make recommendations for some, potential improvements to that process. So wanted to just alert you that there's kind of an interbureau. It's obviously a project led by BPS. The final product will be a report that will be transmitted to City Council because it's at their request that we're doing this. There is an interbureau group largely comprised of BPS and PP&D staff who, of course, do the design review and the the land use review and staff the design commission. So we're sort of convening those staff to identify issues and potential process improvements and other approaches. And the BPS staff will be going to the Design Commission, the Historic Landmarks Commission, and DRAC, the Development Review Advisory Committee, throughout the month of February to do some listening sessions with them to get some of their thoughts and input on the process. And likewise, staff at the Bureau have invited 3 of the planning commissioners. So Chair Routh, Commissioner Thompson, and Vice Chair Spivak will be part of a little focus group, if you will, of the commission that will help provide some information to staff as well, just in sort of crowdsourcing some ideas about the process. And I think those commissioners, 2 of the commissioners were actually on the Planning Commission when DOZA, the Design Overlay Zone amendment, was done, and so have some insight into the process. And then, of course, Commissioner Thompson, as an architect, we thought would be a great addition to that conversation. So I'm sure the commissioners will report back to the full commission on that conversation, but we just wanted to make sure to be touching base with members of the Planning Commission as well. And we will continue to provide updates. And as I mentioned, that council resolution asked for the report to be brought back within 120 days. So it's a very fast turnaround, and that deadline is April 9th. So we're working towards that April 9th deadline. And that's all I have to update on. So turn it back to you, Chair Rao. Thank you.
Okay, we have been voluntold. Great. Thank you so much. Next is the consent agenda, which is entirely composed of the January 13th minutes. Would anyone like to be the hero to first it?
So moved.
Thank you. Move it. Thank you. We have a second?
Seconded.
Thank you. And all in favor? Say or, great. Brian, sorry, Commissioner Ames, you're good? Okay. Great, approved. And now we go on to a work session, our second work session of the Critical Energy Infrastructure Hub Policy Projects. And before we get started, are there any disclosures that anyone has? I will say that I've, I think to commensurate with what Commissioner Knowles had shared last time, I've been in a few community events where people who have come before this body will be like, hey, I'll be like, thank you very much for your testimony. So yeah. Tom, please take us away.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Just for the record, I'm Tom Armstrong. I'm a supervising planner here at BPS and have been leading the CI Hub Policy Project. Just a reminder of where we're at in the process. This is the second work session. Tonight, we're going to talk about the zoning code amendments and the fuel storage reduction program, otherwise known as the drawdown program. Then we'll be back here in 2 weeks, 2 short weeks, to talk to you all about proposed amendments that you may like to see. And then we'll be back at the end of February, your second February meeting, to further deliberate on those amendments and possibly have a vote on recommendations. What we've laid out for you, a sequence tonight to just go through the sort of an overview of the regulatory approach and some things for you to consider as we work through these details. Then we'll jump into the zoning code regulations, specifically talk about the transloading expansion review and the capacity transfer review, and then some other code issues that either you've identified or we've identified through the public testimony to talk about. And then we'll shift gears and talk about the storage capacity reduction program. And then at the end, time for any other issues that you may want to talk about. So a little bit high-level overview of sort of our thinking that went into this and some important considerations. First, I like to think of this as a two-step process, right? We have the limits on new capacity that are embedded in the zoning code. This is the sort of regulating new development, new improvement at the bulk fuel terminals. And then the second piece to this is reducing the storage capacity over time. And that is outside of the zoning code. And so just think of this as sort of a two-step process. They're linked, but they're sort of two separate programs. And as we talked about before, we're trying to support safety and risk reduction at the hub. And we're trying to work hand in hand with the DEQ's fuel tank seismic stability program that really will require the seismic stability improvements over the next 10 years. And at the same time, we're trying to achieve that risk reduction. We're also keeping in mind on unintended constraints on the fuel we need to support our economy and our lifestyle over the next 10 to 20 years. So getting into the zoning code regulations, just a reminder of where we are at currently, which is the existing zoning code. We prohibit new bulk fossil fuel terminals. We're proposing to change that to bulk fuel terminals. Those are terminals that have more than 2 million gallons of storage capacity, as well as a regional connection, a rail line, a marine dock, a pipeline access. For the existing fuel terminals, we prohibit the expansion of fossil fuel storage capacity. But we continue to allow unlimited expansion for aviation and renewable fuels. And we allow for the repair and replacement of the existing storage tanks to support those seismic improvements that we want to see happen at these terminals. So the proposed zoning code amendments shift that a little bit. The limits are more restrictive. So we want to prohibit storage tank capacity expansions for all types of fuel. So taking away the renewable and aviation fuel exceptions. We want to limit the transloading facility expansions and to as a way of sort of limiting the throughput that these terminals can achieve, and focusing on the transloading facilities, because that is, again, new development that requires a building permit that we can regulate through the zoning code and through the development review process. And then we want to limit but provide for storage tank capacity transfers between terminals. So again, regulating the overall capacity of the CI hub as a whole, but providing a process to transfer some of that capacity between the different terminals. And we'll get into the details of that in a little bit. We are requiring that any new tanks be built to the highest seismic design standard, the risk category 4 standard, until the terminals have an approved RMIP, a mitigation improvement plan consistent with the DEQ program, and we'll get into those details here in a little bit. And then an expanded neighborhood contact requirement for different types of development permits to include a wider area of folks that get notice of development activities that are going on at these terminals. So some of the things that we've queued up for you to talk about this evening are the transloading regulations and that expansion land use review, the capacity transfer land use review, the concerns that have been in testimony around future jet fuel storage needs and how to reconcile those, some concerns expressed by Northwest Natural and their LNG facility and how they're treated in the regulations, and particularly also the regulating other hazardous materials, the non-fuel products at the hub, and exploring some of those issues. And then again, maybe once we work through those issues, if there are any other zoning code issues that you want to talk about, we can get into that before we talk about the storage capacity reduction program. So the transloading facility regulations. So we're seeking to, what is currently in the zoning code is all about storage tank capacity. And we haven't tackled yet the pipes and the connections and the pumps that connect all of those tanks together and connect the tanks to the different modes of transportation. Now we want to get into that, and we have a proposal on how to regulate those facilities and limit the expansion of those facilities. So our proposed standard continue to make clear that the replacement or repair of the existing transloading facilities are allowed. Again, we want to see that turnover to improved, safer, seismic resilient facilities. But we want to put some limits on it. And, one is we recognize that, again, through the DEQ seismic stability program, there's going to be hopefully lots of new tanks, replacement tanks being built to current seismic standards. Those are all going to require new connections, pipe connections and pumps to connect to the existing facilities. We want to make it clear that those types of facilities are allowed to connect to the system. And then, to the extent that new or larger connections are needed, we have created a discretionary land use review process to allow those new or expanded facilities. And that expansion review really is to provide a little bit of flexibility for any unusual or unforeseen situations that may come up, that we want to provide this pathway to go through. Again, what we want to focus on and have a set of criteria to really scrutinize these changes and to ensure they're providing a public benefit and that they are constructed as safely as possible. We have proposed that this be a type 3 quasi-judicial procedure. That means it has public notice, opportunities for public comment with a decision by a hearings officer. That decision can be appealed to City Council. And then what you see on the slide here and then the next slide are the approval criteria that we've proposed. Again, we're looking at, there has to be a public benefit connected with adding this new or expanded transloading facility. We want to make sure that the public health and environmental risks are minimized to the extent practicable, that the seismic risks have been minimized, or when there is a DEQ RMIP, approved DEQ RMIP plan in place, that it has been amended to include this facility. So we want to maintain that consistency between what we're requiring and what DEQ is requiring. And so, for each of those three criteria, the way the review works is that the applicant has to provide a substantial, what we call substantial evidence that each of those criteria are met, and that can come with it conditions of approval or limitations to ensure that compliance. The public benefit criteria does not really, it's not specific to one type of benefit. So it can be an economic benefit, it can be a safety benefit, a public health benefit. But again, it has to be be of a public nature, right? It can't just be because the private company wants it. And again, they have to show that evidence, and through the hearings process, there's opportunity for city staff and the public to review that evidence, to rebut that evidence with their own views, to really address the situation and propose any conditions of approval that may make it safer or better address the impacts weighed with that. Couple of examples.
Tom, do you want questions?
Just
at the time?
2 more slides and then we can talk about this issue. I just wanted to provide a couple of examples of where this might come into play. I think I talked about this maybe at the briefing. One example is we saw the first shipment of sustainable aviation fuel go to the Portland airport, but that went through a kind of a convoluted process in that the sustainable aviation fuel came into the Zenith terminal, was mixed and blended there, but there wasn't an adequate connection to the Kinder Morgan Willbridge terminal, which is where the pipeline to the airport is. And they wound up having to transfer that onto a barge, ship it a short ways down the river, offload it from the barge to Kinder Morgan Willbridge, and then pump it out to the airport. Seems like in the future, if there was a new pipeline connection between Zenith and the Willbridge terminal, we would want to provide a process where they could have a, connect to that pipeline, and as opposed to having the risk of a barge going up and down the river, even that short distance. I think the other example, again, that we've talked about is any future changes or disruptions to the Olympic pipeline may see a shift to fuel shipments via marine vessels. These shipments may need in the future, they may be larger barges, they may be different. We may need a different pipe connection, again, to facilitate the transloading of those. And so again, this process would be able to review that need, that public benefit associated with that new connection, and again, making sure that it is up to the current safety standards and a full process to review that. So I think with that, we can talk a little bit about this review process.
Commissioner Spivak and then Commissioner O'Mara.
Thank you. So we had a lot of testimony on public benefit. Are there mechanisms to narrow the definition of that?
Yeah, yes and no. It is mirrored off of other discretionary review processes that we have, like conditional uses or the environmental review process, where it has to do with the evidence to demonstrate that benefit. But there is something that that is an area that we could explore and bring back some alternatives in terms of what types of benefits. I think other criteria also sort of speak to a balancing, that the public benefits outweigh the potential impacts. So we could explore some alternative language that would address that.
Okay, follow up on that, Tom. Can public benefit, or is it limited to City of Portland? So does there have to be a geographic benefit that's tied to the geography of our comp plan? So in other words, there couldn't be an economic benefit that maybe there's demand in Washington State that could be defined as a public benefit, or even to geographies outside of Portland based on economic needs. So is that defined under public benefit, or currently is not, in terms of looking at it as for the geography of Portland, there's a benefit?
I don't think there is a geography limitation. I get what you're getting. I mean, the comp plan and these zoning regulations are for the City of Portland geography. But again, especially in terms of our existing comp plan policy about, sizing the fuel distribution to meet the needs of the region, we've looked at a larger area, although we are proposing to get rid of that language. But we will check with the city attorney to how to address that. But I would think there's not really a limitation to only focus on what is the benefit to the City of Portland itself.
Commissioner Thompson.
Thank you. Looking at the proposed zoning code language, there are 3 types of transloading facility expansions or new transloading facility allowances. And if I'm understanding them correctly, only one of those triggers the type 3 review, and that is the instance that you've been describing of the transloading facility expansion review. So that part is pretty clear to me. But the parts that are less clear is the first case when the new or expanded transloading facility is for a replacement tank, and the replacement tank meets the standards of subparagraph B1B, which is talking about like you can kind of replace in kind as long as you're not exceeding capacity. If I'm following correctly, one could follow the tank replacement criteria and expand their transloading capacity, and that would only trigger neighborhood notification, and it would not be a type 3 land use process with a public hearing. Is that right?
If I understood you correctly, there's a situation where a tank is being replaced and they can connect sort of to the rest of the system. And the question would be, if I'm tracing all of that through the system, at what point is that sort of transloading facilities associated with the tank replacement? And could they be a little larger? And at what point are they connecting into the existing transloading system for the rest of the terminal? And how do we determine at what point is that the rest of that system sort of an expansion of that? I don't know. Do you have some thoughts, Jen?
Shannon Buno.
Hi, Erica. This is Shannon Buno with the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. I think when you're reading transloading facility 2A and 2A1, is that where you're looking? And it says subparagraph B1B. B1B is above, not
Yes,
B2B.
I understand that.
Okay, so B1B is focused on the replacement of the storage tank, and it is, you're not more quantity. So it's just trying to ensure that the replacement tank is the same size as the one that's being removed. There's no increase, and there's a bond that the old tank goes away. So that requirement is ensuring that the transloading is for a tank that replaces an existing one. The existing one's not bigger, and the old one is taken away once the new one's built.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about, and I follow all of that. But I guess it becomes like it gets at the throughput question or the concern that we hear in testimony around transloading infrastructure, which is that if one does the tank replacement according to the subparagraph B1B,
Right.
the way that I read this, it says that as long as your transloading facility is for that tank, it's
Yes.
associated with it, you can expand it or do new transloading, and that would not be part of a type 3 review.
That's right. It would be for the new tank. They'll need new facility for the new tank. So yes.
Okay. And then yep, go ahead.
I think I'm understanding the example you're getting to, because so if someone replaced a tank and they wanted to be able to fill it up 6 times a month instead of once a month, and that required more transloading facility, they'd be able to do that without a type 3 review. I think, is that the question we're asking?
Yes.
Thanks.
I don't know if they need additional transloading facilities in order to fill it up more times.
It's a question. If someone could fill it up much faster by having more transloading facilities, I think what Erica's asking is, would they be allowed to do that under current code without a type 3? And I think the answer is yes, they could. I don't know for sure whether that works physically or
actual
not, but
scenario,
I could
yeah.
imagine that if you have a tank, you want to fill it up much faster and turn it, then the thing, your obstacle would be the facilities to put fuel in and out of it.
Although I believe that the fuel has to sit for some period of time, so I don't know that it matters how fast you fill it up versus
Yeah,
how long it has
I
to
mean,
sit
there could be a different situation where, say, a company is taking 3 smaller tanks and making 1 big tank. And how do you determine where you once had 3 pipes connecting to the rest of the system, you now have 1? And is that bigger or not? But I was getting at, well, I have the pipe coming out, the pipes and pumps coming out of the new tank. And at what point does all that transloading facility to connect to the rest of the plant? Where do you draw that line as being sort of bigger and pump more versus here's the rest of the facility? And I think that's a gray area that we should explore.
Yeah, and I guess to put it more simply, I'm understanding or trying to understand why the 3 transloading facility expansion or addition conditions that are identified in that section of the code, why all of them wouldn't or shouldn't trigger a type 3 review instead of just the one category that is associated with the transloading facility expansion review. The related question is for the third scenario where the transloading is for a new tank when you do the transfer, and the transfer tank, that the tank itself would be subject to the type 3 review, but with the future transloading that is associated with the replacement tank, would that be beyond the purview of the type 3 review, or would that be part of it?
In that case, it's like with the replacement, if you've had a new tank approved for a transfer, the assumption is you're going to need new transloading facilities for it, because you have to be able to use it. So you get to put in the transloading facility for that,
And
in the same way as the replacement tank.
I would add to your sort of second point that came before that question is that the replacement of a tank is presumably to build a new, more seismically safer tank. And so I think when we were developing these, we were reluctant to then subject that tank replacement by sort of association to a type 3 review. That is a thing we want them to do, and we want to encourage them to do, and not run them through a public review process to do. So we understand the gray area and the concern. I think we're also trying to balance those two goals.
For the record, Ryan Singer has
Yeah,
just
sorry,
left the
Ryan
chat.
Singer, thank you.
Okay, I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
Yeah, Commissioner Knowles.
Okay, different subject. So the amendments you've been discussing primarily are to the zoning code. There are a separate set of proposals that you're going to make related to Title 17 and to, what's the other one?
24.
Right. But those aren't in the report. You haven't given us that text.
We've given you the concepts, and later tonight, that is the reduction program or the drawdown program, and we'll talk about those later tonight.
Okay, so my question is this. What is the authority of the Planning Commission to review code that's outside of the land use code, Title 33?
Yeah.
Yeah, good afternoon, Patricia Diefenderfer. I wanted to kind of address that, Counselor Knowles, or Commissioner Knowles. So there is going to be an opportunity to talk about that. We're trying to first take the code pieces that are, that the commission does have the legislative authority to make a recommendation on, and they wanted to turn our attention to the drawdown program. To your question, I think, as we noted from the beginning, this commission is not going to be making a recommendation on the Title 17 portion. And what you have before you are generally concepts that staff is floating to you for your thoughts on to help shape the program. We are still working on the details, and those details in the actual code language will be prepared for council. So in essence, we're looking for your input to staff, and certainly your questions will help us think through kind of the different, elements of that program and how it could work. And we're looking for your input to staff to help shape that concept, but we're not looking for you to vote on it. We don't, we don't need you all to agree on your advice or direction on that. You can provide advice or direction to staff, and we'll try to, factor that into the further development of the program. But so this commission will not be taking a vote on that component.
Okay, so we will not be doing any communication, formal communication with city council on the non-Title 33 subjects.
You will not be.
So we'll be talking to you, and you might include things that we talk about.
We
You
certainly,
might not.
we certainly will benefit from having your questions and your thoughts on it. And I think we'll have to take that through the process of thinking about implementation, how it's actually implemented, how enforceable it is, and other considerations as we finalize those concepts. Yes.
Well, I guess I didn't understand that that was the situation until now.
Nor
I
did I.
thought that we would be creating some communication to city council around those. But maybe I'm the only one here. I'm just curious if
No, I had actually
was your
thought that we
understanding.
would be able to, as part of our transmittal letter or separately, so.
Your
guess-
transmittal letter, as you often do, your transmittal letter can, kind of make some observations or suggestions about things that are outside of the scope of the project as it relates to the planning commission. I mean, that's something that you all do, but that is, you will not be taking a vote on that or making a recommendation on that. Yeah.
I'm
And that
curious.
input will come to staff. I mean, we are genuinely going to take that and try to, incorporate those questions and concerns in the concept.
Well, this is a great conversation to have now. I would propose, as a thought, that separate from a transmittal letter around Title 33, we could, by consensus, straw poll, develop a letter about 17 and 24 based on, general will of the group, as a thought. Other thoughts?
Would that fall under our advising role or would not?
I don't think this
It would
is
be
part of the
separate from
advising role.
advising.
I think this would be going outside of that. And, we've worked really hard with the commission to try to maintain those kind of boundaries, if you will, for credibility's sake. I really would urge you all to think about that. I think it's within the realm to, have some thoughts on that within your transmittal letter, as you often do. I would be a little bit more, frankly, reluctant for the commission to weigh in on a policy that's not really within the commission's authority. I mean, again, as a courtesy, really, we brought this to the commission because the two components make a whole, and we wanted to make sure, it's not unlike other projects, and past commissioners will be familiar with projects like the floodplain project, where there was Title 33 and Title 24, and Title 24 was not before the Planning Commission, but we made sure you understood, what the elements of that were and how they work together. And this is very similar to that. That's precisely what we're doing here. And I would also caution, there's the land use decisions, which are the decisions that are before Planning Commission, have a different legislative path and a different appeal path. And we don't want the Title 17 and 24 provisions to get caught up in that kind of land use, that land use decision-making process and potentially be appealable. So I think there's some important considerations there to keeping that kind of bright line.
I could see how in the transmittal letter we could speak to having received the information and direction about those code sections has potentially shaped our recommendation around Title 33, that it's important contextual information. We are not advising on those elements, but we can acknowledge we received and discussed with staff. And so that would be my recommendation, is that that's how we approach it. I think there's been other examples where we've had building code implications, for example, which is outside of the realm of planning commission, but it's important context for us on a project basis sometimes.
Thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to follow this a little further. So we'll have to see how the discussion evolves around all these things. We might not be able to write a transmittal letter that captures common ground for everybody. I don't know. I hope so. So, I mean, this sort of gets to something I talked about last time, is a little bit of a frustration, is that we're regulating around the edges with what our authority is here. And there's so many different parts, including with the state and with other titles. And it's got to be frustrating for the public, because we had all that testimony. People, I think, came here believing that we were going to make a recommendation on the full meal deal, and clearly we're not. So I'm just noting that our authority here is clearly limited. So on the question of seismic improvements, what is the DEQ timeline for, what's the state's current requirement for seismic improvements to those facilities?
Yeah, we have a little bit on that to talk about that, especially in conjunction with the reduction program. But essentially right now where they're at is all of the terminals have submitted a seismic vulnerability assessment, and DEQ is reviewing those. They are asking for more information from each of the terminals to try and get a level of consistency across all 11 terminals before DEQ makes a preliminary decision as to whether or not to approve those assessments. There then happens a public comment period on those assessments, and then we expect sometime this year that they will begin approving those assessments. And as each terminal's assessment is approved, then the terminal has 6 months to submit the RMIPs, the mitigation improvement plans. And those lay out the 10-year investment plans to bring all of their facilities up to code. Within those plans, they have to have 1, 3, and 5-year milestones, sort of commitments to that progress. Again, DEQ goes through a internal review process for sufficiency. When they get that to a point where they think it's approvable, there's another public review process with comments to DEQ around, before, and then DEQ takes those under advisement before they approve the RMIP for each facility. So especially related sort of to the 10-year timeframe for the drawdown program kicking in, we're still at least well into 26, if not 27, before these RMIPs are approved and are being, implemented. And so that's why we picked the 2036 date for when the drawdown program would kick in, to sync up both, hey, when you're doing all these RMIPs and figuring out how you're going to seismically improve your facility, remember, in 2036, we want you to reduce your capacity by 20%.
So under the current scheme, these facilities have as long as 10 years to actually make the seismic improvements.
Yes. And I think that's where, with the drawdown program, right, as they're phasing their improvements, they can figure out when they want to take that 20% offline. We're just giving them a deadline to do that, to factor that in as part of their improvements. Again, the DEQ rules require these interim 1, 3, and 5-year milestones.
But those are just plans, they're not actual improvements.
Correct.
Okay. So could we, through the zoning code, require a 5-year deadline for making seismic?
You know, can we put a pin in that? And, because we're really talking about the reduction program that we wanted to reserve time later in the meeting to talk about those details and really work through the zoning code provisions for the transloading review and the storage tank transfer and some other issues. But we have some slides to support that
Okay,
discussion.
sure, whatever, it's your show.
It's actually yours, but we're just trying to sequence
Yeah, that's fine.
everything without having to jump back and forth.
Thank you.
Other comments, questions? Okay.
Can I? Yeah, so,
Sorry, I thought you were done with it.
Yeah.
so maybe it would be helpful to go back and show the agenda or outline for today. What we've tried to do is chunk out the discussion by certain topics. So there's some information that staff is bringing to you in support of either questions you've had or things that we thought were themes of the public feedback, input that was received. So we're sort of creating an opportunity at these different junctures to have a discussion. So I think you presented 2 first bullet so far, right?
Yeah.
So 2 first bullet, let's have discussion about that. Then we were going to go to 2 second bullet, provide some information, have discussion about that, and so on. So that's how we've structured it. If you'd like to see something different, let us know. But I think this is, you can also see the way this is sequenced is we're trying to make sure we cover the zoning code regulations because those are the things that are before the commission. And that's where the commission has the most ability to, shape and provide input. And we want to make sure to get through those things. And then we want to go ahead and cover the other things. Does that make sense to the commission? The other topics?
Okay. Generally seeing, okay, Commissioner Thompson?
I do have another question on transloading, which is related to seismic concerns. We have this proposal to require that storage tanks and storage facilities meet type 4 design criteria while the RMIPs are in process. But there is no such requirement for the seismic performance of new or enhanced or expanded transloading that I can find. And I'm looking at the definition of what transloading includes, and it's loading racks, loading arms, and flexible hoses, pumps, piping. I mean, this is like big, heavy infrastructure. And so I'm just trying to understand if there's like a potential vulnerability or what staff's thoughts are on the solidity of the transloading infrastructure and not the tanks themselves.
Yeah, good question. And I think that, our understanding in talking to various engineers is that the risk category 4 standards are very clear for what it takes for a storage tank to be built. But that when you get into sort of the piping and it's vertical and it's bending around and it's going everywhere else, that that becomes more difficult to determine how you comply with that risk category 4 standard. And that's why, in the criterion, we refer to minimize to the extent practicable. Again, that sort of puts the burden on the applicant to show they're doing their best, that they've minimized those risks, but that it also recognizes that there is a limit to what one can do. And again, that minimize to the extent practicable is sort of a standard, a code concept that we find in the environmental overlay zone as a way of, mitigating the environmental impacts to the extent practicable. It just recognizes there's a limit to what one can do as part of a project before it becomes financially infeasible. But that,
I was-
again, through the discretion, there is a discretionary review process to be able to pick that apart. To review that, to figure out those details, to ask the question, is that really what is practicable, or could you do more as an applicant?
How is DEQ handling this? Do we know?
Good question. We can find out.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, I also had a question around, like, how does one begin to adjudicate as a hearings officer to the extent practicable? Are there best practices? Like, I hearken back to, DOZA, where we had, objective standards and then discretionary, and the closer we get to objective standards, of course, is better for everyone, and more clear. What does practicable
You have
in
So
practice?
practicable is actually defined in the zoning code. I can read it if you would like, but the staff and the hearings officer do have experience with that because it is a part of criteria that are used today. So, let's see, practicable. Rolling through the code. Practicable is capable of being done after taking into consideration cost, existing technology, and logistics in light of overall project purposes. That's what that means.
Maybe you can help me with a little history, is when Zenith has been adding facilities to switch from asphalt plant to liquid fuel tank, would those be under today's definitions? Are those transloading facilities?
Yes.
So they've not been changing their tanks, they've been changing the transloading facilities, servicing those tanks.
I think it's a little of both.
Okay.
That they've been improving and maintaining the tanks, but they have been adding rail offloading racks and other piping and pumps and that sort of thing.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions? Okay,
Should we move on?
let's do.
All right. So the next piece of the zoning code that we got a lot of testimony on and some questions from you that we wanted to provide the opportunity to talk about was the fuel storage tank capacity transfer review. And again, this is designed to provide a relief valve, a pathway that allows the transfer between existing facilities, between existing terminals. And as part of that, again, there's a criterion to show that there's a continued need for retaining that capacity in the hub overall. And that there is a transfer tax, if you will, that the sender, the receiving side only sort of receives 80% of the capacity being sent from the sending site. So we're achieving a 20% reduction as part of that transfer. And then we have, I think it's 6 or 7 different review criteria. I will note that in this slide, on the next slide, that we have incorporated some of the technical amendments that we proposed in a memo that was in your packet for the last meeting. But just to go through those, again, you're transferring storage tank capacity between existing bulk fuel terminals. So somebody can't build a new terminal or a new fuel facility with less than 2 million gallons and then start transferring it over to one of these existing ones. A key point here that I was making earlier on B is that we're showing that there's a continuing need for the storage tank capacity being transferred, and that you can't accommodate it within the existing storage tank capacity of the receiving site. So again, over time, as we see the reduction in demand for liquid fuel, as that frees up capacity at other terminals, the transfers are going to become harder to justify. So C is, just making sure that the sending site is transferring capacity that is in service, and that once that capacity has been transferred on paper, that they are demolishing that an equivalent amount of capacity from that sending site. Again, we have the sort of interim standard that the new storage tanks are being built to risk category 4, or are part of an approved risk mitigation plan. And that risk mitigation plan itself has been amended to include or account for the new transferred tank capacity. I think there were some questions from commissioners around the next two. One is that, and this gets to sort of the improved safety through the transfer, is that we want to see any transfer, any new storage tanks is moving farther away from the river. So we did include a more objective standard to say that the new tank has to be at least 250 feet from the top of bank of the river, and that the receiving site demonstrates that it's a safer location than the sending site. Again, that could be, through the geotech analysis showing that the risk of liquefaction or lateral spread is less than where the existing tank is. Some sort of analysis that shows that this is a safer location for that capacity. G builds in that 80% reduction of capacity. And then, again, H is back to making sure that the transloading facilities, are built to the highest seismic standards. I think this is one where we have sort of built in that reference to the DEQ RMIPs, and get into sort of the DEQ approval of those transloading facilities as well. And so, again, trying to address that issue. I think the example, the scenario that we've shared before is the, some terminals may decide, especially the ones that are closer to the river that have more of a liquefaction hazard, a greater lateral spread, they may find that it is not cost effective to take on all of the seismic upgrades required by DEQ, and so they may choose to shut down. I think we see examples of that in California with some of their oil refineries that in face of higher standards that they're choosing to close up rather than meet those higher standards. That may be, if that situation comes to pass, and it's a big facility, it may leave the state short of the overall capacity to meet our fuel needs. And so this transfer pathway would be a way of maintaining that capacity in one of the other terminals in a safer location, and going through this process, including that criterion B, showing that not only is there a continuing need, but that continuing need can't be met at that existing site. So basically you have to show like there's a greater need for this to replace this capacity, and the receiving site is essentially running at maximum capacity to be able to have this transfer approved. I think that's the basic overview here for you to get your discussion going.
Commissioner Ames, for the record, I know there was some analysis done on future demand, and how the drawdown program doesn't impact future demand. Was there any analysis done if there is transfer of capacity between sites, and how that would, basically what kind of buffer we have there?
Right, so the scenario analysis is done on the CEI as a whole. So the 370 million gallons of capacity, and that's where we're showing like we're running at about 70% capacity utilization right now.
Yeah.
So you got about 30%. 30% of 370 million, 100 million gallons, right? So if one or two of the larger terminals said, we're done, that's going to squeeze that margin, and now we might be short, right, for supplying our needs.
Right.
And so this is where those other terminals can conceivably go, well, there's a market, there's a need out there, I need to ramp up capacity, so I'm gonna go through this process.
Acquire the capacity from.
Yeah.
But if it's, we're getting 250 feet away from the high bank, we're making sure it's a more seismically resilient area, we're building to higher standards, why couldn't we have it be 100% of the transfer instead of 80%?
I think
We're already doing the
this
drawdown.
is again sort of
Yeah.
linkage to the drawdown program and just
To
sort
further
of
drawdown.
interim staff to make sure that we account for all of that drawdown of capacity. Or again, it may be a way where the existing terminal, like you can't add 20% just to make up for what you were you
Deficient.
gave up in your
Yeah.
drawdown.
Thanks.
Yeah. Vice Chair Speed.
Thank you. I'm curious how, if there's a way we can write in the code so that someone would not use this as an opportunity to create an export terminal. Because it's sort of current fuel demand. I assume the implication is fuel demand by Oregonians, but it could be fuel demand for a refinery in California. It could be like, it's a discretionary review. I'm wondering if we could get some sort of language to clarify this is domestic fuel demand, or something like that. Because I feel like we've already seen some terminals being used for export, and I have a little concern that there might be a way to play through these approval criteria to create an export terminal and not even meet the demand that may be created by a tank closure.
Yeah. That's a little tricky because we can't regulate the destination of the product. And so, for example, Zenith uses some of their capacity that presumably was built to serve the local market need, but it's being phased out. It's used to ship crude oil up to the Puget Sound refineries. Now, that's no longer serving the local need, but I think that's a good point. We can explore that criterion B and what it means for continuing need for what. But I think, based on our, we were basing our analysis, the parametrics model, on the Oregon fuel demand, which is the bulk of what is moving through there. And so, I will say that, especially once, and we have the slide in here later to talk about it as part of the drawdown program, but I think once you get beyond sort of that 10-year time frame and all of our other programs started reducing demand for liquid fuel, the transfer becomes harder because there will be even more sort of excess capacity in the system especially as we phase out of gasoline use. And so it'll be harder and harder to justify that transfer
Answer what?
from one site to another.
Yeah, I can see how with clear and objective standards, it would be very hard to do that, but these are discretionary standards. Hopefully we can come up with some sort of language that guides decision makers, so make that hard. Yeah, thanks.
Commissioner O'Meara, for the record, just confirming this is for permanent transfers, so we're not talking about as someone is looking at taking on their improvements and they've got to empty out tanks. I assume there's like temporary holding tanks and other infrastructure that's utilized, so this is just for permanent transfers of capacity.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, and I think we got into this last time, the whole thing around the performance bonds is that we have provisions in there where, like, when they're doing the seismic upgrade, they can build new seismically sound tanks, keep the old ones operating, and then when you switch over and start using those, you gotta demolish the old tanks and take them offline and take them, decommission them and demolish them, and so that there's no net increase of capacity.
I feel like Commissioner Knowles is.
Are you going on to the drawdown program?
Not yet. But if we're done with the transfer, we can go on to a couple other zoning code issues we have teed up for you. All right.
Tom, sorry, before we leave these two topics, Patricia Tiefendorfer for the record, I just wanted to share that I think what you're seeing between these two different discretionary processes that have been created for both, adding transloading facilities and allowing for transfer is, as we take away the exceptions, I think what we're trying to do here is just create some kind of pathway for operational flexibility, right? No one knows what is going to happen in the future, what technological changes might actually happen that might also be able to improve the movement and delivery of these things. But what we're trying to do is keep some operational flexibility and account for, the needs for, I think the pipeline, for example, to Kinder Morgan is a compelling case study, right? Of it would be better to have a pipeline moving between those two terminals than putting the fuel on a barge, for example, right? And I think those are the kinds of situations that we're trying to account for, knowing that we can't account for every kind of contingency that might come up. And so just wanted to kind of close the loop on this conversation by just kind of sharing that overarching observation and what those two processes have in common.
Just quickly, both of those seem, do we get any input from the operators on either? I mean, those seem pretty operationally heavy. I don't know anything about fuel facilities, and I don't know if those were, are those things that they wanted?
Yeah, I think
Feedback from them?
they're both of those examples that we brought up are issues that have been raised in various pieces of testimony from either operators or industry consultants or the Working Waterfront Coalition. I will say, last week when the record was open, there was a letter from the Western States Petroleum Association that, again, was talking about some operational flexibility and essentially just room to maneuver and respond to these emergent situations. And so, again, the alternative are sort of strict limits, a crisis breaks out, let's go back and amend the code, and we're back here and we're talking, it's a different process. It still gets the same amount of sort of public scrutiny, if you will. But those pathways are on the books and can be utilized when needed.
Thank you. Commissioner Thompson?
Thank you. I've got a few. I'll start with the more straightforward questions first. With respect to the safety question on the slide you showed earlier, the word design, location and design was struck out. What was that about?
You want to?
So that is one of the technical amendments because design of the tanks is addressed in criterion D. The Bureau of Permitting and Development didn't want to have to address it twice. They just, that criterion D talks about the design of the structure.
Okay. And then for the location, Tom, you provided a description of how the relative safety of a location could be determined from a seismic standpoint. Where is that communicated to applicants? And is seismic the only lens that we're bringing to that, as opposed to also considering air quality, wildfire, some of the other themes that have come up?
I brought up the seismic and lens to this. I think that's been the primary focus of this, but the criterion as written is just general safer. So I think it would be sort of within the realm of both the applicant and or opponents to raise issues around wildfire. I'm not sure that it would extend to air quality. That's more sort of a public health type standard, but certainly sort of within that phrase, receiving site is safer could be other factors other than seismic stability.
Okay, so the applicant can decide how they want to interpret that and bring it forth, and as written, there isn't additional guidance about what should be addressed as part of that.
Correct. But I also think that anyone can raise those issues through the process, right? The applicant makes their case, provides their evidence, and then people, staff, and the community gets an opportunity to rebut that, raise additional issues that then have to be addressed. And so it could be that people say, well, what about wildfire, and you're moving closer to Forest Park, or and then it would be incumbent upon the applicant to show how they're mitigating that wildfire risk, but that would be compared to the sending site. And so you would do an analysis of, well, this is 1,000 feet from Forest Park, and this is 500, but we're adding this fire suppression system or something to that effect.
Okay. And then in item D, it says that the storage tank needs to meet risk category 4 or follow the RMIP. Why is it an either or? If we're going to require a risk category 4 for a period of time, it seems like it's compatible with the DEQ's lens. So why the either or there?
Good question. It's because when DEQ went through their process, their rules around the RMIPs are an either or to put it other way, building to risk category 4 is the safe harbor, right? That if you build to risk category 4, you have met the DEQ standard. But you can do something else and demonstrate that you have met the DEQ standard. And so we expect that is going to be the key point in the approval of these RMIPs is, if you're doing something other than building to risk category 4, have you met the DEQ standard? And we didn't want to sort of preempt that process and say, nope, everybody has to build to a risk category 4 standard no matter what. So we were trying to respect the DEQ rulemaking process that came up with their process and just address anything that might come up in the next year and a half, 2 years before there's an approved RMIP. We want to make it clear you must do that risk category 4. After you have an RMIP, we're going to defer to what's in that RMIP.
Okay. And do we know if DEQ is considering operator cost burden in developing the RMIPs? This is going somewhere, I promise.
I don't know, but we can find out.
Okay. But if we could, maybe if it's possible to get the program manager for this DEQ program at one of our meetings. I don't know if other commissioners have questions. I mean, there's a lot of interplay between the proposed zoning code and what they're doing. And it would help me to understand where the overlaps and holes might exist.
Yeah.
Commissioner Brandon.
I'm going to
Okay.
second
And
that.
then sorry.
Go ahead.
The last thing, I'm just going to put this out there. I'm not really expecting like a resolution or an answer. I would be curious to hear if other commissioners have been grappling with this. But I'm trying to understand what the DEQ requirements, how that's going to influence the use of these properties over time, because I feel like there is a potential trade-off with the capacity transfer program and the benefit of that relative to like some natural attrition. And if that's a likelihood because of what the DEQ program requires of operators, and if it becomes economically not sustainable and we're going to be losing a bunch of capacity, potentially, how does that compare to the capacity that we're drawing down? And is it, are we actually gaining something more than we would if we just let things run their course? That is all.
Thank you so much. Commissioner Brandon.
I'm going to second in that I did request that DEQ be unquestioned if they were going to be a part of this because there's so much intersection there. And then when it comes to the intersection, I know our purview was not very clear. It's just a certain title and the comprehensive plan. But within the comprehensive plan, while DEQ might be looking at seismic resiliency, the comprehensive plan has other aspects on human health and environmental health. So wouldn't it be in our purview to also add something that addresses what we heard from community on wildfire risk and air quality and other aspects of human health? Because that is within the comprehensive plan as part of the guiding principles that's described within it.
Yes, to the extent that we can do that through the zoning code, through new development, a new development or new development permit process, if you will. I think that's where, it's sort of like other situations, like where we change a parking standard or a landscaping standard, right? We don't make every development in the city go out and add a couple more parking spaces or add new trees, right? We wait for them to come in as part of a development permit for those standards to kick in. I think where something like air quality kicks in, they're sort of figuring out where we're sort of looking at air quality impacts versus regulating air quality due to operations. There's a sort of a fine line there between what is sort of a land use related to the use and what is an operational sort of ongoing permitting type of thing. I'm trying to come up with other examples of
Is
where that
there
could sit.
harm in addressing cumulative impacts in policy? Because that's something that at the state and federal level they are doing. And I know the city operates in that way and each group is doing silos for things. And so if this is one of the few opportunities that this is brought to us, can you recommend it to the best of your ability to find a way that we can? There's a lot of data on air quality in that area. It would be easy to continue that air quality, perhaps with PSEF funding, because there's organizations doing that track the changes in this drawdown, which has nothing to do with the Planning Commission. I'm restating that because the community is listening and it was not clear to them that be part of this project per se.
I guess, Patricia Defender, for the record, I was just going to share that I think, just reinforcing what Tom said, the city generally, the permitting of air quality permits are part of how these types of uses are regulated. And that's done also by DEQ, like a different division, if you will, of DEQ. Right, Tom, please tell me if I'm misstating. So I think that, that there's already an entity that looks at that, and the city isn't really in the business of air quality permitting, right?
Absolutely not. I know
Right.
that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, a lot of this, and we've been talking just to share, as a team internally about, what's possible and also what kind of structure and, infrastructure, almost like a bureaucracy you have to set up to do. Like, there are certain things that we may think that might be a good thing to do, but it's also, you need to stand up whole programs to support that, right? Compliance, enforcement, monitoring, whatever the things may be. So we just kind of like been thinking about what are possible solutions that also don't require the city to, necessarily stand up entire new divisions or groups of people within bureaus to support. I mean, as it is, the drawdown program does have resource, considerations associated with it. So just putting that out there for your
And has there
consideration.
been collaboration with DEQ throughout this process and this recommendation? I think we've all kind of asked that. Are they
Oh,
on
yeah.
board with what you have recommended?
Yes. There is a letter from them in the record. And yeah, we've sort of continually been meeting with them to understand where they're at in their process, how their rulemaking came together, and to essentially to make sure that these rules and restrictions are not going to create barriers to the implementation of their program, because we see that as the main vehicle for forcing the companies to take on these seismic improvements and not just be a voluntary, when I get around to wanting to do some sort of improvement, then I'll do it.
I mean, their program is not fully fleshed either because of the timeline, and they're still getting inventory and all these things. So I know I've asked this before, but what is the push on our timeline? I know y'all got a grant, and most FEMA grants are due in March, and there's no extensions. I know this. Is that the real reason?
It was the FEMA grant timing was a reason at the beginning of this for moving things along. We did get an extension, a one-year extension,
What?
so.
Oh, you're very lucky.
Yeah.
Not like my clients.
So
Okay.
that is one, separate from that, I mean, that sort of is more of a funding issue behind the scenes. I mean, now we are sort of moving through the process. I think the other is just the urgency around this issue, right? That it's the same way, like, why do we have to take 10 years? Right now, there are actually sort of plans on the drawing board, right, for various terminals that want to do lots of renewable fuels and other things. Anyone can come in and propose a big expansion of their renewable fuel system before these rules are in place. And so at the same time, from a city's perspective, there is some urgency to get these new zoning code regulations in place to provide those further limits on the amount of expansion that the terminals can take on. So I think that is another, and this may be also related to the drawdown program or options there, is that sort of what can we do right now? What can we get implemented and put in place due to that urgency? And what, well, yes, that might be a better way of approaching it, but that's going to take more resources, more staff time, more rulemaking to figure out how to do. And so that's also one of the considerations is the timing of everything. We had a couple of other issues, discussion topics. We had a testimony from the port about jet fuel storage needs that we wanted to highlight for you. We also had a testimony from Northwest Natural about their LNG facility. And then we had a lot of testimony from the community about regulating other hazardous materials that, again, we wanted to sort of queue up for you and give you an opportunity to talk about. In terms of the jet fuel storage needs, the jet fuel portion of this, it's primarily stored at the Kinder Morgan Willbridge, which is the pipeline connection to both PDX and down to Eugene. And so, that is a key facility. And as the port notes, we are, our parametrics modeling is done for the CI hub as a whole. And we're sort of looking at can the whole thing sort of operate as a system versus, as they note, we have 11 different companies each making their own individual decisions, and that the issue that the port is raising is Willbridge, Kinder Morgan Willbridge is a key component of this whole thing, and if they can't expand, it's not necessarily clear some other company can pick up that slack, or what the coordination, or as we talked about, the connections between the two are needed, and would that somehow constrain the jet fuel supply that's needed around airport operations? So we wanted to sort of tee that up for you to see what you all thought about. I don't know that we necessarily have anything queued up as options or proposals, but it is an issue that we think we need to work through and try and figure out how to address.
Commissioner O'Meara, for the record. If I'm remembering the point of some disagreement, it was around population projections. And so for parametrics and the city projections, was that specific to City of Portland, or was there a regional population growth projection? Because I'm assuming that the port is looking at regional demand and population growth coming out of Vancouver, other parts of Washington, statewide. And so just wondering, what was the discrepancy there? Was it the same population numbers that were used?
We were looking at population growth for the state as a whole, and they were looking at the region. I forget if it was the 3 or 4 county region, but what we were looking at is that the growth projections seem to be in the port's forecast quite a bit higher, and they also use they did their analysis, their consultant analysis found that the growth in essentially aircraft operations or passenger counts is tied more to an increase in gross domestic product, so as opposed to just purely population growth. So that they were using different demographic factors, but I think the memo that we provided you last week showed that we can essentially, if the jet fuel is still sort of a small percentage of the overall fuel in the system. And I think, again, it's one of those situations, as with the drawdown program, for the next 10 years, everything's pretty flat. And then we start, as gasoline demand drops, we start to have lots of capacity in the system. So how do we manage the next 10 years where we do have and acknowledge that there's an increasing amount of jet fuel needed in a system that may not be dropping as fast as we want and may not free up that capacity that can be repurposed to serve that jet fuel need. And that's on a CI hub-wide basis, and what the port is bringing is like, no, that is in a microcosm, Kinder Morgan Wilbridge, right? They would need to repurpose even more of their gasoline capacity to jet fuel to meet this demand. And so do we need to consider some sort of relief valve specific to that purpose?
I want to follow on that question. I've been concerned that the parametric study is flawed, particularly with respect to aviation fuel demand, because it relies on state population projections. And the aviation sector is one that's driven it may be driven in part by population growth, but it's driven by a lot of external factors. The national economy, the way people are going to be moving around in the future. It just feels very risky to me to be limiting, be putting the aviation supply within these caps and taking it out of the category it's been in.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've developed a response to the port specifically, other than what you showed us last week.
It was mainly that to put that jet fuel demand sort of into scale compared to everything else, and show like, well, over time it's going to go from 8%. Currently, it's about 8% of the fuel flowing through the hub. It's going to go to 11, by 2035 with that growth, and yet, what that means in terms of utilization for the hub as a whole is it would go from 68% to 70%. So
No,
it's all right there,
Well, I
but
saw those numbers, but my concern is that depends on the projections in the parametric study being correct.
yes.
And if they're not, then that's a fuel supply that could be constrained in the future.
Yes.
Vice Chair Spivak.
Thank you. So the port's basically asking to get their exception for the fuel that they use in terms of tank storage capacity and transloading equipment. And they project, like there's competing projections out here. They project 152% increase of fuel in 10 years, which is hard for me to get my head around, because is the airport really going to use 52% more fuel in 10 years? So, I mean, that's what they assert, but I don't know what to do with that, just as like you don't know exactly the parametrics. And they also put in there, it says, not all facilities in the hub are positioned to meet aviation fuel needs, which sort of suggests that maybe some of them are. Do you think that do you know if that's a possibility? I mean, we've talked about Kinder Morgan, but their letter doesn't say that they're the only one that can do it.
Right. I think that's what we were getting at around the transloading exceptions is, some of, like, Kinder Morgan Willbridge, there's a pipeline connection that goes to Kinder Morgan Linton and serves some of the other adjacent ones, right? That's the landing point from the Olympic pipeline, right? So there is a pipeline system that connects some, not all, of the terminals but as I was saying, it requires cooperation and contracts and business dealings between the terminals to work things out, to be able to facilitate that movement or being able to use that extra capacity. And it could be, the terminals say, well, I don't want to get into the jet fuel business or not. I think that's one of the complications that the port is raising is that, jet fuel is all running through Kinder Morgan Willbridge. That's the key cog that we should be accounting for.
I think it's also important to note that it's not just the port that uses aviation fuel. There's airports all over the state that rely on that source for their aviation fuel. Medford, Eugene, Redmond.
And there are letters in the record from Medford and from the Oregon Department of Aviation speaking to that effect.
So can we exclude Jet A and aviation-related fuels, or is that?
We currently do.
Oh, we do.
Under the current rules, there
but
are
not
no
the
limits.
proposed.
Not in the proposed.
Okay.
And I think, the reason why we move this way is right now it's unlimited. And so I think speaking to some of Eli's earlier concerns, anyone can come in and, hey, we're going to have a big export facility. And so our goal was to at least place some limits on it. And so can we come up with a different scheme that is sort of tied to the port's projection, which is what we tried to do with that supplemental memo is, well, if you take the port's growth projections and you apply them to every airport in the state, what does that look like? What are those needs might be as a starting point of, is that a pathway you want us to explore?
But isn't that extremely unlikely that becomes an export facility when the closest refining's done in Bellingham and the only other means of getting there is by barge through the Columbia River,
No, I'm not so concerned about the exporting aviation fuel, but I wonder if someone could build a big tank for aviation fuel outside of, because it would be accepted as the port's requesting, and then 2 years later they're using it for something else. Like, would we be able to control that, or you can't control that?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Well, I will say, I don't know, I guess that was more part of a franchise agreement, but I could see if we create more allowances for this, that somebody comes in for a tank for jet fuel, that there would be a condition of approval that says you can only use that for jet fuel. Right, that you could not then, the demand falls out, or we're now have electric planes. I'm not going to use this for some other type of fuel. If they're using whatever exception we come up with or whatever limit we provide, there would be a condition of approval that you can only use that facility for that purpose.
Commissioner Knowles?
Is the current exemption from the drawdown requirements or the limits, is that in the zoning code or in Title 17?
Currently, the existing zoning code restricts expansion of fossil fuel capacity,
Except for
except for,
irrigation and renewables.
yeah, primarily. There's other exceptions for like marine terminals.
So if we were interested in continuing that exemption, that's still within our authority.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it would be helpful to understand if this is truly the only location where jet fuel can be stored, because if not, it almost seems like more of a business negotiation, right? That if there is capacity and ability in other locations in the CEI hub, that becomes a Port of Portland business proposition to the other terminal owners. But if this is truly the only location and it presents an actual limitation, that's a different scenario. So it'd be helpful for me to understand if that's been confirmed.
I mean, we know that Zenith has it's SAF, it's the Sustainable Aviation Fuel, but they, as Tom described, like they have a process where they have aviation fuel of a type on their site, and then they get it to the Kinder Morgan facility to pipe it to the airport. So my suspicion is it would be a similar process for other facilities. They could probably have the facility to store it on site, but then getting it to the pipeline to the airport does have to go through the Kinder Morgan site.
Okay, yeah, Commissioner Knowles?
Since we're on the subject of what is and is not included within the limitations, renewable fuels. So one of the comp plan amendments that you're proposing is to foster transition to a low carbon economy. So why should we not favor renewables? Wouldn't that be consistent with that comp plan policy?
You know, I think two things. One is, again, this, trying to put some limits on the amount of fuel, regardless of type, in the CI hub. And at the same time, considering renewables are a replacement fuel, right? And so and especially this is more on the diesel side of things, especially for medium and heavy duty vehicles, construction vehicles. So that over time, if we have a lot of fossil now, as renewables come up, that fossil capacity is going to come down and sort of equalize, or it'll all shift over to renewable diesel capacity. And so one of the key questions is, well, in the interim, we need to stand up some of, we need to get started with creating that renewable capacity to get the momentum to using renewables, and then the fossil capacity will come down. I think this is where, again, the utilization rates of the existing capacity, we know that there's existing capacity out there in the current system that could be repurposed to accommodate some of that transition for the renewables without having to add a lot of capacity to the system. An alternative could be to say, okay, you can add 10% more to your terminal if it's dedicated to renewables. That was one of our alternatives that was in the discussion draft, but that we got a lot of public comment. We want to restrict expansions and move towards this drawdown program. So I mean, that's the approach that we've taken in this proposal.
Okay, thank you.
If I can then, I'd like to put myself in.
I have to disclose that I just received a text from someone. Can I share what they said? That Zenith is on record of planning to export renewable aviation fuel. So I can't say I've checked anything on that, but if that's true, that would sort of raise again the question of import versus export that I thought wouldn't happen, but maybe.
I guess I also, when I'm thinking of expansion or exemptions, you know, there's one aspect of, you know, ensuring that we have the fuels that we need on a near timeline. And also I come back to renewable fuels are just as combustible, you know, from a safety standpoint, are just as combustible as fossil fuels. And so, like, to me, also the safety of surrounding area is also something that I'm holding.
I will add to your point, Eli, that we had a lot of legal challenges around this as the first, even our fossil fuel restrictions around, you know, this. I think my interpretation of all of that is we can put limits on the size of the facility, especially in the name of public safety, environmental health, right? We don't have to accept all comers that want to do everything as big as they want. So we can balance that and be able to do that. What we can't say is like, oh, you can build that jet fuel tank, but you can only use it for sending it to the airport. I think that's where it gets more difficult.
Oh, I recognize that, yeah, but I'm just pointing out, if we do an exception for aviation fuel, because of what you just said, we can't control where it's going.
It's likely, given the location, but yes, we can't dictate where that fuel goes and
I feel like we've been circling around just,
Okay.
And because this is just a whole new area for me, so I'm still, you know, a few months later absorbing. When we talk about the facility-specific nature of jet aviation fuel, is that, I mean, I hear blending and I hear loading to the airport specifically, and also we heard in our last episode that there was, that the port is expanding their storage capacity, and so that issue, you know, the issue with supporting expanded access to jet fuel is the bottleneck of that storage tank and the pipeline and the transportation. Is that, I'm curious if that, what else I'm missing. I'm hearing blending, settling.
Yeah, I think if I understand your question there, and I think there is testimony in the record from the port that talks about, yes, they're building lots of storage capacity out at the airport to meet this future need, yet there's still sort of the operational aspects of it, that it still has to land in the hub. And that there are, I forget, standards or regulations that say all of the blending and settling and everything like that should not occur at the airport.
And why is that?
I don't know, that's a FAA.
Yeah, we think it's a FAA.
Is that safety for the airport and not for the neighbor? I mean, it's not
I think it
Yeah.
probably has to do with safety at the airport. But yeah, I imagine it's also just kind of a resilience thing, right? You can't, if you need a certain amount of fuel there and you need reliability, if something should go wrong there, you can't have everything happening there, right? So it's a little bit of a resilience plan for the airport.
Or
you know?
it's sort of
like
an insurance that, as I understand it, there's blending and settling, and then there's testing to make sure that the aviation fuel meets the fuel standard, that before it gets shipped to the airport and before it goes into a plane. And that having that separation, if you will, is a way to make sure that whatever's going out to the airport meets the standard fit for consumption by a plane, and that you're not crossing pipes or turning valves that, oops, the fuel that got in the plane wasn't.
When we've done some interviews with the operators, I mean, it was kind of interesting to me that the pipeline from Olympia, like, it'll run gasoline, then they turn it off, and then later they run aviation fuel. And what they have to do is then store that aviation fuel and then sort of like let it settle. And there's still some gasoline and whatever else was in the pipeline. They get that out somehow. And so there's a whole process for ensuring that it's like jet fuel and that it's the jet fuel that they need. And then they blend it or whatever else they need. So I think there also may be operational things that they just don't do at the airport that they do at the Wheelbridge facility or wherever else. So there are some other operational things that we think go on at the facilities that have to do with that.
I'll just point out that one of the staff noted that in the port testimony, there's a statement that the National Renewable Energy Laboratory and the U.S. Department of Energy state that blending at airports is not recommended. But why?
I guess I come back to the tension, like, my assumption then is, at least in part, because they're worried that something would go wrong at the airport and that would cause calamity at the airport. But what we're kind of saying instead is, let's have that calamity happen near a neighborhood, and that it's no one's fault here. It's what we're swimming in, and also that is what I'm hearing currently. Commissioner Thompson. Oh, and then Commissioner Ames, sorry.
Yeah, I was just going back to Commissioner Knoll's comment about low carbon options and why we wouldn't want to advance the market and the uptake for those. What I was taking away from testimony, at least maybe the majority of testimony, is that climate impacts are a concern, but were sort of secondary to the impacts of a potential disaster, and what that would look like for human and environmental health. I'm still interested in hearing more on the structural aspects of building and storing any amount of fuel down at these sites. Maybe Commissioner Brandon had mentioned this last time, but if it's possible to get a structural engineer that has been involved with this work to come before us and explain a little bit more about just their perspective on storing fuels in this location and what measures are actually available to achieve a Category 4 design. Is it like deep soil mixing? I mean, what are we talking about here? And is there a pathway that would allow for something like sustainable aviation fuels, like, to be securely stored here? Or is that just sort of, there's always going to be a level of risk, which is what I suspect is the case. But additional expertise would be helpful to my understanding.
Okay, we'll see what we can do.
And Portland State University, in partnership with an engineering firm, has been doing research, because we had someone testify on that, who, I will have a disclosure, I've volunteered with her before, and she's talked about her research a few years ago. It's still ongoing, and so I know there's I'm trying to find it.
Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. Awesome. Commissioner Ames, did I see your hand up? Okay. Others? Commissioner Alvarado.
Just a quick wondering about the volatility of jet fuel versus the other fuels that are stored, if there's like higher levels of danger, or if they're equal, or is that a consideration? And if so, like going the route of having higher increase for jet fuel, are we allowing a material that's more volatile? I'm just curious if that's a thing.
I don't know. We can find out. I wouldn't want to speculate. I suggest, in the interest of time, we move on to the other issues. So we received a letter from Northwest Natural with respect to their liquid natural gas terminal that is one of the regulated terminals. It provides gas for peak winter heating on cold days like we had last week. They are noting that they are a regulated utility by the Public Utilities Commission, and that, as part of that process, they may need to add transloading equipment, compressors, other equipment to maintain the pressure in the gas distribution system, and that the need for such an equipment, that every 5 years they do what's called an integrated resource plan, which basically is, here's our forecasted fuel needs and everything, and here's all the improvements to the system that they're going to make to meet that need, and that through that PUC process, they approve, what system of investments that basically get included in the rates that ratepayers have to pay to do that. And they're saying there's a process there where they may need to add some equipment to this LNG facility to meet those distribution needs. And they were looking for, because they're a regulated utility, looking for an exemption from the transloading limits. And so we just wanted to daylight that for you. I think this is one of those situations where without an exemption, they would sort of go through their PUC process and then have to come back through and do the discretionary review process for the transloading. And, obviously having an approved IRP plan would be part of that demonstration of need. And so, but it does add time and cost to go through that sort of second additional approval process. And so an exemption from that, because they're a regulated utility, for the purpose of maintaining the local distribution system, could be a narrow exception to that process.
Commissioner O'Mara, for the record, is there distribution specific to Portland Metro, or is it statewide? Or even beyond?
It's a little of both. It's not statewide, but it extends
It's beyond Portland Metro.
Beyond Portland Metro. I think they go all the way down to Newport and various areas. But I think they have 4 of these LNG facilities. There's one in Newport. There's their main facility is out in Mist, in the Coast Range. There's this one here in Portland. There's one up in Washington, actually, that's outside their service area, but they contracted it and it's connected. And so all 4 of those sort of work in conjunction.
Tandem.
To maintain the pressure, especially on these peak days.
Sure.
Where there's high demand.
And have they presented demand projection data around gas utilization?
I believe so, in the integrated resource plan, which is we put in the record, so we can point to that. We can pull out some excerpts and point to that. I don't think the current IRP identifies any needed improvements to,
So they're just saying it's possible?
They're saying it's possible. We don't know. And so this would be an alternate way of addressing that future need should it come up.
Sure. And I think we did have data presented by their testimony around, it was either statewide, I know Commissioner Spivak and I were trying to get data on statewide or citywide utilization of natural gas. I think this is one of the challenges of this project is that we might have electrification objectives that align with our comp plan for the city of Portland, but we're talking about utility access for parts of the state that we can't really have any jurisdiction over. And so that makes it very challenging in the sense of, you know, maybe PSEF can incentivize electrification here for low-income folks to switch to electric. But we don't have that ability really to mandate incentives for other jurisdictions. So that's one of the elements I'm challenged with is just, you know, we can have policy objectives for the city, but these distribution sites are really beyond, and there are folks reliant on these utilities that are outside of our city. So that's more of a statement than a question, but it is challenging.
Yeah.
Thank you. Their letter says, transloading exception confirmation. We do not believe the draft's definition of transloading was originally intended to include utility infrastructure. What does staff think? I thought that transloading would include the fuels that Northwest Natural would be moving, but they seem to want confirmation otherwise.
I recall that there were sort of two aspects, and one is that we did not include LNG like in the parametrics modeling. We were focused on the liquid fuel elements of that. We were primarily.
The L in LNG is liquid, right?
Yeah, but we were thinking of more, I think both liquid fuels primarily for transportation, right? Gasoline and
So
diesel.
parametrics didn't model.
We did not
liquid natural gas.
model natural gas demand of it, primarily because of the integrated resource plan and the Oregon energy strategy and the statewide climate goals all indicate that natural gas demand should be falling as well. And so we weren't as focused as planning for future natural gas expansion. And so we were not trying to dig into their integrated resource plan to say, well, what kinds of improvements? We're not seeing them indicate that they need to do a lot of improvements to this Portland facility. I will also note this Portland facility is relatively small compared to some of the other, like the Mist is way larger than this Portland facility. So I think what I took away from their letter was this regulated utility aspect that really puts them in a different category than all these other private companies that are operating the terminals, and has a different sort of business case, and the PUC offering a different level of security on sort of what types of improvement are needed at that facility.
Okay, I guess what I'd like to clarify is if Northwest Natural were to apply for new transloading equipment, would that be regulated by this project?
Yes.
It would be, okay.
Yeah.
So that's the clarification they asked for, I think.
That's what they're sort of saying.
They don't want that answer, but that's what it says.
They're correctly interpreting that they would be subject to these limits, and that if they wanted to add facilities, a compressor at the Portland LNG terminal, they would have to go through the transloading discretionary review process. And they're saying like, well, wait a minute, we're a regulated utility. We have to go through all these other hoops to show a need for this facility. That should be enough.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. else on Northwest Natural? Okay, moving on. We got quite a bit of community testimony about regulating other hazardous materials through this project. And I guess, some of that testimony, I guess, was a little bit confusing as to what exactly they were referring to, as if, is it all types of hazardous materials for all types of uses? Is it only the CI hub terminals that we're talking about? But these up to this point, we have been focusing on regulating fuel capacity. And that's what our current regulations, current zoning code regulations address. And that's what we've been focused on through this process. I think the phrase, hazardous combustible toxic materials includes a wide range of different materials, including stuff like firefighting foam. And so, it beginning to regulate those materials just sort of represents an added scrutiny that we have not addressed yet. I think what we would note that in terms of most of what not the non-fuel materials that we can see again through our storage tank analysis is that most of that is asphalt, and that there is not a lot of those materials out there. These other sort of storage tank capacity is only about 15% of the total capacity at these terminals. There is this category around lubricants and oils and other petrochemicals. It's about 4% of what's being stored or handled out there. And so I guess it just it makes up a minor amount of the materials that are out there. And so we were trying to address most of the risk that is represented by the gasoline. Gasoline and diesel represent about 75% of the fuel that's flowing through the system out there.
Was there a problem with some public comment has some specific suggestions for definitions? Was there other problems with those definitions? 4.3% is something, 15.7 million.
Yeah, we can, I think that aspect of it is sort of, I guess, easier to move the line on and move that into the included category. Again, it's, the phrase that was being used just was overly broad, right? Hazardous, combustible, toxic, that includes a lot of things. And I think, I don't know that I've seen it in the testimony before you, but during the discussion draft phase, or maybe even before that when we were exploring alternatives, there was talk of a limit of no more than, I think it was 10,000 gallon tanks, of these other types of materials, right, that we wanted to regulate. I think, if you wanted to explore this, we would, it's an expansion of what we've been trying to achieve through this process. We would want to make sure that it was focused on the terminals themselves and not all of the other industrial uses that are even occur in the hub, let alone Portland's other industrial areas. And, I think, again, moving the lubricants and the oils and those is probably easier. I think we've been clear, even going back to the original fossil fuel regulations, that asphalt was not a fuel, and that we have not regulated asphalt as a material to date. We have not done any studies on sort of what is the demand for asphalt and how much is out there, and, you know, is that increasing or decreasing? So I think it's just a sort of an expansion of the scope of the project that we just have not analyzed to date.
I think my interest is probably not in asphalt, because I think the concern is explosion and damage to the river. Like, that's a motivator for this project. And if we could expand the definition to include things that would be explosive and damage the river when the big event happens, then I think that'd be nice. And I don't think that's probably true for asphalt. I could be wrong.
Commissioner, sorry, I'll just jump in to say that, just to be clear, we've done absolutely no analysis about any of these other materials and what the implication is of folding them into limitation. They were never part of the scope of the project to begin with. So I think there's some that should factor into these considerations. I mean, we have no understanding of what the impact would be to fold in.
I appreciate that. Yeah, and I think I would want research to be done on that. But in some ways, this is like aviation fuels. If you don't mention it, then someone could start filling up the tanks with all this other stuff that's not a bulk fuel. So I think the goal of the project is to make us safer. And if we have this big, I don't know how big that exception is, but what if 15.7 million went to 4 times that because there's no rules about it? That's what's the case in the proposed draft. So I'm trying to figure out a way to guard against a risk of something that's not being, people are going to look for other uses for the tanks when there's less demand for fuel. And if they figure out that they can just put some other hazardous explosive material in the tanks, then we're not achieving some of the goals.
I just, sorry, I'm the son of a gas station owner, so I would question, like, on the lubricants and motor oils, like, where would be the demand for that? If you think about if you fill up your gas tank, my parents do it like once a month, some people do it every 2 weeks, but you change your oil, if you're good, every 3 months, every 6 months, and they put in this much oil. So it's just sort of like, even if they would, like, why would they fill it up, I guess, like, why would they use like lubricants and oil, motor oils? It just doesn't seem like there's a demand for it. Like, nobody's, like, aviation fuel, sure, like, we should talk about that, but motor oils and lubricants, I think those are things that the demand may decrease as the demand for, like, gasoline and other things like that decrease as well. And so we'll see they're sort of linked.
They may, unless we start exporting them.
Again,
But I take the point. I mean, but there's dangerous things in the tanks. The idea is to have less dangerous things in the tanks. And if we provide an open-ended exception for one kind of dangerous thing, I was surprised we have 15 million gallons of those things you just mentioned sitting on the island. It's kind of a surprise to me.
Commissioners, pardon me, I'm just going to chime in again to say that, I think and we've struggled with this as staff as well. This project has a bottomless well of questions, quite honestly, and I think it's, I don't know if that was a pun or not, but I didn't mean it to be, but I just want to, this is the type of decision where at some point we'll try to, we're going to bring a couple of experts if we can bring them. We're going to try to answer your questions, but we're never going to be able to provide, I think, 100% certainty. And there really is, at some point there's resource considerations, right? Like we don't have the resources to continue to hire consultants to do more and more analysis. We don't have the staff time to continue to, burrow deeper and deeper and deeper on some of these topics. So, and I think I would just also point out, I think it's very compelling what Tom mentioned earlier about the fact that right now, however long we take to do this, terminals can expand right now, right? They can have no limits on expanding in those 2 fuel areas that we discussed. And so the longer we take to develop policy and code to address that issue, that could happen. So I would really just kind of put those two things out to you to factor into the discussions as we have them.
Yeah, I hear that. I will say, I think, I appreciate, staff bringing up, what are some of the main comments that have been happening? And as I think part of our charge, part of our responsibility is to ask some of those questions, and we can choose to let them go, or not. But I think that those are worthy inquiries. I think that there has been a tension also of like, this is really urgent, like, and as we said, we don't know when a subduction event is happening. We don't know when a tank could fail, like, in its current. There are a lot of things that could happen even in the time during our deliberations. I guess I also think of, and I was trying to find it last week, but NASA ops at the Jet Propulsion Lab used to have a saying, like, this is too important and urgent to rush. Because we, the deliberations that we have will influence council, and that will have real impacts on people's daily lives and on the future of our economy and our environment. And so I really appreciate the conversation. I did not know. We learn something new about you every time. I will say that there are a number of people who have come up to me and say, he has an East Side for All sticker on his laptop. But I also look at, 15%, and that's just right around the amount that we have for jet fuel. So if we're talking about the safety of jet fuel, I think it's reasonable to at least talk about what is the safety capacity of lubricants, whether or not they ever go anywhere. Yeah. So those are things that are coming up for me. Other thoughts? Questions, comments? Commissioner Thompson has had a costume change. Others before we move on? Great, thank you. Oh,
All right.
and there we are.
Now we're to the storage capacity reduction program, or the drawdown program.
And can we pause just before
Yeah.
we start? Because we heard earlier that a lot of this is outside of the purview of Title 33. I would like, and one of the things besides see if we can have someone from DEQ and a structural engineer in a future session. I also think that, and I don't want to litigate it from the dais, but I do think that it's a worthy conversation about how do we take, I do feel a strong responsibility with the time and effort that community members have placed before us, and the fact that ours is a scoped role, but it does exist in concert with this larger program. How can we, while acknowledging our lane, also share what we have heard and what our thoughts are beyond our scope? So I don't want to relitigate that, but I think that we can talk about that offline. Okay, thank you. That's my thought. Others? Okay.
Yeah, okay, so with the reduction program, again, we are trying to support safety and risk reduction by, planning for a smaller hub going forward, and, trying to do that in conjunction with the DEQ program, and really at using this point in time as the terminals are all preparing to prepare their RMIP programs, to just be on notice that, hey, we want you to plan for being 20% smaller. And that our the modeling that Parametrics did for us seems to indicate that there is about a 20% capacity reduction is achievable without having negative impacts on the fuel supply. And that we feel that that the analysis, that parametrics analysis does have sort of conservative assumptions, especially around the rate of turnover in there, that provides an added margin to that assessment, that it sort of achieves a balance where we can make the hub overall smaller, and yet still provide the fuel that we need. And I think this is borne out in some of the energy demand curves and the utilization rates in the parametrics model. But I think also the key takeaway, and this gets to one of the questions earlier, was that we are looking, those utilization rates are fairly flat, to maybe even a slight increase, especially when you factor in to the jet fuel demand, and that is only out beyond sort of that 10-year time frame that we really begin to see those demand curves bend, and that the capacity in the system really begins to lessen. So some of the mechanics, again, we covered this before, but we are looking at reducing the in-service fuel storage capacity. Our proposal is 20% by 2036. We are looking at fuel storage capacity, fuel storage tank capacity, because that is a physical improvement that we can measure. It is something that, in order to change, that the companies have to come in for a building permit. It's something that's identified in their RMIP programs. It is, and I think this is also an important note, and we can have DEQ speak to this. The RMIP programs are not regulating the volume of fuel that is moving through the system. They are regulating the physical components of that system. We are looking at fuel-related materials. We are setting up a system, and we would do this under the zoning code anyway, to inventory what is the in-service fuel tank capacity to establish that baseline. And that then, we would have a benchmark, set a benchmark for which we could then measure that reduction. And that we would come up with an enforcement structure that includes fines and monitoring and compliance with those requirements. Again, I think we are at a moment in time where all of these terminals are going to be making major investments to comply with the DEQ program. And this is an opportunity that when you're laying out those programs, to ensure that you factor in this reduction as part of those improvement programs. We don't want them to build a new tank and then, hey, 5 years later, oh, by the way, you got to take that out of service. I think we also anticipate the need for, and have talked about in the proposed draft documents, monitoring and reporting to city council, especially around sort of the implementation of the RMIP programs, and monitoring the fuel demand and the other policy work at the state and federal level, and how is that affecting our fuel forecasts, and really sort of, again, building off of the DEQ milestones, having a 5-year report to council to just check in and see, here's how everything's going, and is it going according to what we think today and in 2026, or how has it changed, and are any adjustments to the program needed? So some of the things for your consideration to think about is, and what we've heard in testimony is, how can we, vary the scale of reduction, and how does that impact the risk that is out there, that the sort of the size of the hub and those facilities represent. I think we've even heard tonight, is there a way to accelerate that drawdown? But at the same time, what does that drawdown mean for fuel security? Not only meeting our future demands, we've also seen, and there's some testimony about resilience and the sort of having that flexibility of that excess capacity to meet changing needs, meet emergency fuel demands, maybe elsewhere in the state, and that sort of thing. We've also heard, I think both in testimony and from some of you all, is there a way to prioritize the age of the tanks, or the seismic stability of the facility, as a different way of sort of prioritizing the most dangerous tanks, the most dangerous areas, instead of just a blanket universal percent capacity reduction. And I think, this is related. I think we've heard, is there a way to get faster implementation of the RMIPs? I think, this is one where this is sort of the 10-year program is set by DEQ. I think it was done through their rulemaking process and sort of assessing what it's going to take to do all of this construction, and rebuilding with 370 million gallons of tanks or improvements. I will say, we can look at incentives, related to any sort of regulatory relief or the drawdown program or financial incentives. I've seen proposals, for example, the county's proposal for a financial responsibility includes a lower rate once a terminal has fully implemented their RMIP. And so that's the type of financial incentive that might be possible to accelerate the implementation of the RMIPs and to really get at the goal of making the hub safer. I think I'll leave it there and leave it to you all to talk about the drawdown program.
So first, a comment and then a question. I don't have a lot of confidence in the parametric study. The folks who prepared it are not market analysts. They're resiliency experts. They didn't take into consideration price or availability of fuels in the future, but more importantly of the alternatives, electrical energy and electric vehicles. So we won't have a say in this, but I'm not very comfortable with the assumptions that you've ended up making about it not constraining fuel supply in the future. So I want to say that. I also want to stipulate that these things are a danger to the community. They're in the wrong place. They're there because 100 years ago we were a port and we've got grain silos all along the river. They're there because, we're a port, and these ended up there too. never would do that today. So is there a way to advance the safety requirements at a faster pace than what DEQ is doing? Because 10 years seems way too long to me. So is there a zoning code option for us to do that?
Yeah, I think that's what we're trying to tee up here, you know, a couple of things for faster implementation of the safety improvements would be like regulatory relief. So, you know, maybe you tie jet fuel or renewable expansion allowance to put it in your RMP. Once you implement that, you get access to that limited allowance of expansion. That could be one of those trade-offs to incentivize through a regulatory process. You know, maybe there's a lower drawdown level if you hit it in 5-year mark or something like that. Financial, I talked about the county's proposal for varying rates. We've kind of thought, you know, maybe there's a property tax abatement. You know, all of these new improvements are going to trigger new assessed values, and presumably property taxes will go up for all of these. We haven't done the financial analysis to know how much of an incentive that would be. It would require state legislation to authorize. It would require county approval to create that program. But that's another sort of avenue that we could explore, that we could, as a city, bring to the table to accelerate this implementation.
Commissioner O'Mara, for the record, I'm not sure what the permitting costs would be associated with this, but that would be another element to look at in terms of, is there an early compliance incentive that could have a permit fee waiver? I don't know if new SDCs would be applied for these projects, but we've effectively waived SDCs to new residential development for incentivizing purposes. So I do think that whatever tools in the financial box we have at the city level, we should look at for incentivizing early adoption. I'm also wondering, are there any incentives that the state is able to offer with DEQ or other resource? But I fully agree that we need to look at earlier compliance and how do we incentivize that?
Commissioner Alvarado, for the record. I'm just curious, this is probably a question I should have asked like a lot earlier. But I'm curious if there's if the precedent of this being something that's done in different cities, different countries, that like a drawdown, this is a valid, very like well-used strategy for risk reduction, or is this something we're trailblazing in? I'm just curious what.
As far as I know, we're trailblazing here. And as I have expressed before, you know, this type of thing where we're actually trying to take away something that's on the ground that is, you know, even if it's a non-conforming use, we don't make property owners go out and tear things down. So this is a different approach, but it is a different situation, right? You know, in terms of the community safety and the risk involved with these facilities in this location.
Yeah, thank you. I just maintain kind of my question mark around the efficacy of like, this is the right thing, but it sounds like it's in concert with other, with other interventions. So just question marks for me.
Commissioner Brannon, and then Thompson and Knowles. Spivak, did you have? Okay, great. That's.
So was it considered to do a scaled drawdown of like every 2 to 3 years or every 5 years have a percentage decrease so that we actually see that reduction? Because what tends to happen in a lot of policy is we make these goals and then it gets kicked down the road. I've seen many a strategic plan of the city where you look in 5 years, you're like, oh, we didn't do those things, and then it becomes another thing that's come up with, but at least this provides some accountability in the near term to reduce at a percentage. And it makes a little bit more sense to me when I hear the word drawdown, think of wells and such. But was that a consideration, even just like an early 5%, which based on what you've said on the assumptions in each of these tanks, they're not all full anyways. So that 5% would still be reasonable for some of industry.
Yeah, I think, again, we were primarily tying it to the DEQ program and all of these investments and improvements that they're going to make, and that they could factor in that drawdown as part of that. I think one of the challenges is, there's all kinds of different tanks, and there are big tanks and little tanks. And so it's not clear that if you said, well, immediately take 5% offline, how they would go about doing that. I think one of the ways that we have tried to achieve an immediate risk reduction is by saying that these regulations apply to in-service tank capacity, and that anything that's already out of service, you can't bring back online. And so we tried to get a sort of an early win by just making it clear that out-of-service stuff just stays off. But I think just given the operational aspects of the terminals, it was difficult to know that if we just said, okay, go show us 5%, it's not 5% of every little tank, right? It's, you got to take these offline, whereas maybe all of that excess capacity is actually space in all of the tanks that are being used. So I think that's one of our, the uncertainties of having something that is quicker, faster, earlier, partial. We just don't know how that affects the operational system, and how that excess capacity is sort of distributed. We don't think that there's just empty tanks sitting out there as part of that 20 or 30% of underutilized capacity. We think it has to do with the fuel level and the flows that are happening in the tanks.
Seems like we got mostly testimony from like big port, Northwest Natural, big industry, but there wasn't really any from these small tanks you might be talking about. Was there any outreach to try to get that from them? So they might be fine with just fines.
I think two things, if I understand your question correctly. One, we're only dealing with the 11 largest terminals out there, right? We're not dealing with the smaller fuel distributors that get their product from those large terminals and then move it on. So we didn't hear a lot from the large terminals. That's what tends to how this goes. But there was a letter last week from the Western States Petroleum, and they talked about the impact of this and the need for sort of flexibility and operational analysis, and the difficulties that might occur. And I think that's where what I'm talking about is you have a large site, it has many, 40, 50 different tanks, and it could be hard to just say, okay, now take 5% off of that. And they could say, well, we're using a lot. I don't know where I find the 5%, because that system, the excess capacity that we think in the system could have to do with the fuel levels in the tank, not just that an empty tank is sitting there.
Okay.
Maybe I have 3 cars. I use 3 cars at different times, but now you're telling me, no, you got to get rid of a third of your vehicle capacity. Well, do I have to get rid of my pickup truck? I use it on the weekends, or I use it when I go to the mountains. I use it, I need that capacity, but how do I eliminate 1/3 of my capacity? something like along that orders.
Make them all convertibles? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Okay, Commissioner Thompson and then Knowles.
So to go back to the conversation around incentives and carrots, I was wondering about the viability of tying the transloading facility expansion review to a completed RMIP with DEQ. And I mean, that the impact of that would be sort of like a de facto moratorium on transloading infrastructure expansion until that work happens. Maybe that would cause it to happen more quickly. But that would do a couple things. It would, right now, the proposed code doesn't address the seismic safety of the transloading infrastructure itself. So that's somewhat of a concern for me. And if there is this like more holistic site scale RMIP that addresses that site's performance, that might generate some community goodwill that could be helpful for the hearings that go along with those expansions.
Yeah, that certainly would be a regulatory incentive, like, you know, complete the RMIP and then you get access to these processes. It may mean a needed facility, you know, it may mean we're barging sustainable aviation fuel down the river for 10 years until those facilities complete their RMPs. And that might be the risk trade-off from something like that.
Okay. Any follow-ups?
Well, one other question that I had is related to bullet 4 up here. This was like my ideal. In an ideal world, we're drawing down based on actual seismic risk and not just this sort of blanket approach. But going back to Patricia's comments and the discussion that we had earlier, Tom, it seemed like the amount of oversight and like the administrative uplift with that would be insurmountable. But if that's not the case, if there does seem to be some approach or avenue that could look at actual tank design or their actual conditions for the drawdown, I'd be interested in learning more about that.
Yeah, I think one of the tricky things around, especially tank age, is we know the age that it was originally built. We don't know how it's been maintained or improved over time. And so it would be sort of accessing whatever fire marshal or EPA or I don't know who, the federal agency that's responsible for that gets the inspection reports to figure out. Tank age is not always an indicator of the most vulnerable or the most vulnerable tanks there. But I think also in terms of seismic stability, it is, you know, I guess it speaks to the DEQ program in trying to improve overall seismic stability, but also, you know, through that program, the companies are going to do their own assessment about what to improve and not to improve, and the sort of financial trade-offs there based on that level of improvement needed to meet that seismic stability program standard.
Knowles and then Spivak.
So I don't know that I support this idea, but let me ask a question. What if you made all of these facilities non-conforming uses and or said that at some date soon we were going to prohibit that use and they'd be non-conforming, it seems to me that would create an incentive for those facilities to either conform to the seismic standards or shut down. But again, I want to say, I'm not sure I even think this is a good idea, but I'm throwing it out there to see if.
Well, again, under our zoning code regulations, we do not shut down non-conforming uses. You're allowed to continue to operate.
Right.
So that's sort of how the zoning code works, and again, why we have this program outside of that.
But my thought was, most businesses don't want to be in that situation because it creates all kinds of problems for being able to expand or modify, as you know. I mean, you guys are in this business.
I think the other concern that we hear with non-conforming uses is the ability that it can affect financing of facilities. And so if we want them to do all of these investments and make all these seismic improvements, and yet you're
going to make
a
it impossible for them
non-conforming,
to raise
it's
the
going
money
to,
to do it.
they may just say, well, I can't get the financing, I'm done.
Thank you.
Probably something you've already looked at is, could someone use a property line adjustment to meet their drawdown requirement? By just like shifting a tank to someone else's property that's already lost? Like, is it, I'm wondering, can moving property lines be a way to game the drawdown system?
I don't think so, because we're tying it to this inventory that gets done by October 1st of this year. That says what you're,
So each piece of
one-
land has to individually meet the drawdown requirements?
yes.
Okay, I was just wondering if someone could just shift their line so that those tanks are someone else's now, an old tank. Who's, I don't know.
I don't think so.
I think you're probably right, but
Thinking-
it talks about you can't create a new non-conforming situation through a property line adjustment. That's what made me think of that question. If it's all conforming, you may be allowed to do a property line adjustment to shift your tank to someone else.
But not,
But that other person would have to deal with the tank. Would have to deal with it. It would only work if someone basically retired a tank and you say, well, I'm going to do my part by just giving them my tank. They don't.
I mean, this is a non-land use regulation that we're writing, right? So it's Title 17. So it doesn't work, it wouldn't work the same way, but it is interesting to hear you say that because we haven't written the regulations yet. So like, we'll think about that as we're writing these regulations. Like, how do we ensure that that is clear, that that's not a way to get out of it?
I will say in the current zoning code regulations, we do have standards in there to prevent like companies from creating multiple entities adjacent to each other as a way to get around that 2 million gallon storage limit. And so there may be a way to sort of put in some blocks to that, what you're talking about in terms of gaming that system by transferring it to other entities and that sort of thing.
Questions? Other questions, thoughts? We've got 10 minutes, 9 minutes.
Just what happens next?
Yeah.
Well, I think is
For the record, he asked what happens next. Some consternation from people who, there was no mic.
I think Patricia spoke to this earlier. We heard a lot of testimony about this. What do we do about the scale? Can we do it quicker? What are the impacts? We're looking to, what did you hear? What resonated with you? What are your concerns? What do you want to see us achieve through this program? Help us shape this program or interpret everything that we heard. How do we balance the different concerns, even the concerns we heard tonight, the different sides of the issue. We're looking for your feedback on how do we figure this out?
Yeah, Commissioner Knowles, and then I'll.
So a process suggestion or discussion. So a couple of things in play. We've had requests for some additional expert testimony. So it feels like that needs to be accommodated. You know, I think we've all been thinking about amendments we might want to offer, but I think it's important to hear from the staff first what your changes you're going to propose, because if you're doing what you usually do, you're going to respond to some of the public testimony and maybe propose some staff amendments. So it feels like in sequence, those are the things that need to happen. And then I guess, you know, not necessarily here, but in the officer discussions, there's got to be a scheduled discussion
Yeah,
too.
absolutely. And I'll just, so yes, we're hearing that they're a structural engineer, DEQ. Folks, are there other experts or knowledge bases that that people, and this is not your last time, but now would be a very good time. If there was, yes.
I would like to understand, I think someone brought up I think Commissioner Brandon, the more smaller to mid-scale operators. Was that you that brought that up? And I mean, for me, it's just understanding what is the feasibility of complying with this from an operating standpoint. I think about, I mean, I know what it means to comply with seismic building code and having older URMs in a housing portfolio and the complexity that goes along with that. And so for me, I would like to hear, you know, what would incentivize an operator to take this on? What resources would be helpful? And just understanding from sort of that feasibility perspective.
Thank you. Commissioner Thompson and then Commissioner Brandon.
In terms of process and next steps, I just wanted to offer that work groups are something that's available to us. It's a tool in the toolkit. If people are interested in the drawdown aspect of this project and feel like more information is needed or more dialogue is needed, we can establish a work group that's sub-quorum and work with staff to tease some of that out. Just putting that out there.
Great, thank you, Commissioner Thompson.
I have two things, one on the process and then one on additional recommendation. I think I had mentioned an emergency resiliency manager, maybe utilizing someone within the city to get an idea of what it takes when a tank like this does collapse and the plans that go into that. I know each of those tanks is supposed to come up with it's part of that, the bill was coming up with an emergency management plan for those tanks. And so what does the cleanup look like? What goes into that? And then what would their recommendations be when working on sites like that? Because that's what the operators are going to have to be aware of and know of. And they might not know it yet because that wasn't planned before, hence the reason why this bill came about a few years ago. And then a process question. How are we're not doing recommendations. We're not doing.
Is your mic on, Commissioner Brennan?
Yeah, it's just,
It is.
Oh, okay.
I'm just
Sorry, I
far.
wasn't hearing you as
Okay.
clearly, so I just wanted to make sure.
And then as far as recommendations, we're not doing a letter or anything. You just want our verbal feedback.
well,
Yes.
I happened to be looking at the bylaws, as one does, so what it says, you know, we have three primary, if I may take us to this place for a moment, of three ways we engage. One, holding hearings and making recommendations to City Council on proposals to adopt, amend, and update the comprehensive plan, the zoning code, and significant transportation plans, projects and issues, the portion of the Title 11, trees identified in blah, 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 urban renewal, street vacation siren regulations, and renaming city streets. So that is a recommendation to City Council. So that is within our Title 33 on the zoning piece that we were talking about earlier. The most recent drawdown, advising the City Council on plans and policies regarding such issues as housing, transportation, urban design, equity, economic development, public buildings, environmental protection, resource conservation, and other policies of citywide interest. So I think there can be a conversation about which is a recommendation to city council and which is an advice letter of some kind. Does that sound? And then the third, just for, because I mentioned it, providing a forum for community members to learn about principles, policies, and programs that promote sound land use planning practices.
This would be in our advisory capacity. You want our feedback for this program. Okay.
And I would say we can also advise the city council. That is within the charge of our bylaws.
Well, okay, so I'm just going to chime in for a quick moment. That's
in our bylaws.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, we've done a lot of work to try to interpret what the I mean, many of you were here for both the revisions to the code that happened when we moved from a Planning and Sustainability Commission to a Planning Commission. We also had a lot of conversations through the bylaws conversation about defining what the advise function is. So we can certainly have that conversation further. I'm just bringing to all of your attention that we've had many projects where there have been multiple codes, and we've been very clear that what is before the commission and what is not before the commission, that the council is the decision maker, but we've asked you to give us input on it. And so the floodplain regulations is certainly a prime example of that. We had simpler projects, if I'm recalling correctly, like the odor code, if you all recall that, was a much simpler project in concept, but it had changes that both affected the zoning code and another title of the city code. And we've been very clear on that. So we want to just continue to evolve our practice in a consistent way. We want to make sure that the recommendations and the feedback that comes out of this commission is, credible and viewed with a lens of credibility within the scope of what the commission's authority is. And so I just want to impress that. We can continue to talk about that. I lost my train of thought there was some other piece that I wanted to try to address, but I'll come back to it if I think about it. Thanks.
Else?
The category of additional information, I posed this question, I think, in my written submittal. I'm really interested in the aspect of the availability of the alternatives to fuel. Our job is necessarily a balancing job, that always is, between multiple conflicting objectives, but I would be assisted in trying to figure out that balance if I understood more about what the future holds for the price of alternative energy and for electric vehicles in particular. 50% of the fuels we're talking about here are gasoline. So the alternative to the use of that gasoline is electric vehicles. And I'm interested in sort of what the projections are for that. But the other 50% is diesel, aviation, a bunch of other things for which there are fewer substitutes. There are not going to be electric airplanes anytime soon, I don't think. So I'm just interested in how we can assure the public that if there are restraints that are going to be put in place on these facilities, that it's not going to have a negative impact on the rest of the state. Now, I don't know what you can do about that in the time we have, but that's a concern I have anyway.
Any others? We are 1 minute over. Okay.
Chair Ralph, may I just take a moment to just, in the vein of next steps and some comments, particularly Commissioner Knowles' comment about amendments. So want to remind you, because you've been flooded with a lot of paper and materials through this project, that one of the memos that was written was an amendments memo. So the suggested amendments thus far from staff. So I wanted to just make sure that you remembered that. Commissioner Knowles, you also mentioned, wanting to know what amendments staff might suggest. And I think helping to facilitate, providing the information that we did, bringing that information to bear on the conversation is an attempt to help facilitate your thoughts on amendments. I mean, we can come back with some things that maybe are a little bit more concrete, if that's of interest. I mean, I think for us, it's a balancing act too, right? Of wanting to give you the space to suggest amendments, but also understanding how technical this subject matter is, wanting to provide you with fodder that's helpful to you. So I think as we continue to talk about this, please kind of let us know if you really want us to suggest something about something. Please be explicit about that, and we can do that. Or, I mean, Erica suggested, we have used work groups. I know we sometimes will talk one-on-one with a commissioner who has a particular idea and wants to see if it's workable, flesh it out. So I'm just offering that we're available here to have those kinds of conversations with you, knowing how technical and difficult this subject matter is.
Thank you so much. Last bits before we do have an officers meeting on Thursday. We can discuss this. I will say that I did not choose this, but I will be singing it at a funeral on Thursday. So I will not be there at that time. So happy to sing openly, happy to meet afterwards before, and I'm so sorry for the timing. I didn't choose it. We will, yes, Nyla?
Just in terms of like follow-up to the proposing things, if anyone in the commission has an idea for amendment, talk to Tom, is that right?
And Autumn.
And Autumn, of course, yes.
I would
talk
appreciate
to-
it, yeah, if you could
Send
just
to Autumn.
send it to Autumn, I think maybe with this, frankly, with the CC to me and Sandra, and then we'll go ahead and try to
And to me, please, thank you
work
very
through
much.
it, yeah.
Can I make a point of clarification here? In general, all correspondence from commissioners, one of my main roles is I am your liaison. So I will be the middle point between staff and you. So yes, definitely feel free to CC other staff, but it's my job to make sure that whatever you have to say gets to the people who it needs to go to.
Thank you. Awesome.
Okay, so we should just send it to you, and we don't have to keep track of the other people. Okay,
Oh,
thanks.
that's nice job. Great. Love that. Okay, and with that, we're continuing this agenda item to February 10th at 12:30 p.m. So that is the next time that we will, so we can have a couple of weeks to percolate. We'll find people. We have check boxes. Thank you all. This is a lot. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.